So welcome back, everybody. And I hope everyone managed to grab a coffee and you're all feeling energized and back here now for the first panel for this year's conference. So the first panel is going to be looking at the issue of space sustainability, binding regulation versus the space race. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers here to discuss these issues. One thing to mention just throughout the whole of the event, we are really wanting to get you guys involved as well. So we want the panels to be as interactive as possible. So there's going to be plenty of time for questions and for comments from the floor. So please do get prepared for that. And we look forward to hearing from you all during the discussions as well. But as I said, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers with us here. So to introduce them and also to introduce the topic more broadly, we're delighted to have with us Sara Dalladone from ESPI, who's going to be moderating the session. Sara, great to have you here. I'll pass over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Does it work? Can you hear me well? Perfect. Firstly, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and moderate this panel. I would like to start with a brief introduction about the topic. Of course, we have heard from the presentation before that actually space governance, the space sector and the space economy is evolving as never before. And we see many type of public and private investment into constellation, which of course raise concern on the topic of sustainability, which is the topic of today. And it's not only about sustainability of the orbital environment, but as we have heard before, it's also sustainability of spectrum, which of course is renewing the space race and the digital race. We see that the number of satellites that we are launching into space is something that could be foreseen almost more than a decade ago. Since then, of course, we see a major policy awareness and a major policy momentum. And this, we can see it in national strategies. We can see on the rise of space sustainability into the international agenda, as well as in the private sector engagement in space sustainability. We see a policy momentum and we see a proliferation of initiatives on space safety and sustainability, which of course depends on the nature, and we see voluntary measure, binding measure. Of course, when we talk about voluntary measure, and I'm focusing on the UN Space Sustainability Long-Term Sustainability Guidelines of 2019 of the UN, the space rating, the Zero Debris Charter that we will talk about, there is a need of making sure that actually those are not falling short in terms of impact. And when we are talking about binding nature, of course, we see that at international level, we are struggling to find agreement on international rule. And here it's where come Europe. And with the EU space law, we could potentially, and we are trying to really be the pioneer in terms of binding regulation. Of course, there are concerns that we will discuss during the panel. We see that in Europe, we have 12 countries has national space law. Italy has just released a national space law last Friday, and many other are developing one. So we need to see how this fit. The EU space law will fit in the broader context. But of course, when this will be really my last point, we need to focus on the fact that now Europe struggles to be recognized as a space power. And beside hard capabilities and programmatic aspect, there is also the soft power component that include foreign diplomacy, that include policy, and that include legislation. And this is where really the EU space law can start to have a role. So I will stop here, and I think you will have many questions and not, unfortunately, many answers. So I'm really glad to introduce the speaker for today. And with that, I would like to introduce Guillaume Delabrosse, Head of Unit at Innovation and New Space at DG DEFIS, European Commission, Gisela Sus, Head of Legal Service Department at the European Space Agency, Eva Verneke, CEO of Eutelsat, Chiara Manfletti, CEO of Neurospace, and Jordi Casanova Tormo, Head of Telecom and Space in EU Public Policy in Amazon. I would like to first thanks all the speakers for being here today. I would like to start with a question to you, William. And in my introduction, I really speak about the role of this EU space law on really positioning Europe as a leading player in terms of binding regulation. And I would like to ask you about the status of the EU space law, especially looking at the EU election and what we are expecting in this sense. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Welcome to all. I'm very pleased to be on stage this morning with my colleagues to discuss indeed binding regulation versus space race. Of course, I mean, you can expect that I'm not going to reveal any big news today when it comes to the EU space law. Of course, we are We are in this transition between two commissions, preparing the ground for the next commission. What I can tell you is, of course, that we want to secure the ground for the EU space law to be on the agenda of the next commission. Why? Because what we have done is an evidence-based piece of legislation. This is really based on facts, on evidences, and the clear outcome is that we need an EU space law right now. So we are preparing the file to be mature for the next commission, but it will be up to the next commission, to the next commissioner, and to the next college to give the green light to put it on the agenda. What we are hoping for is that it's going to be on the agenda of the next 100 days, the first 100 days of the European Commission. So it will be soon on the agenda. What we'll be doing in the meantime as well is continuing exploring every single pieces of that law, discussing with member states, discussing with industry. That's what we're doing to ensure that basically once the law will be on the table, we can move quite quickly in terms of negotiation with the co-legislators. So we are not wasting any time. We're continuing preparing the piece of law. Just stepping back a few moments, because I think it's a big change of mindset, speaking about an EU space law. So far, the European Commission, backed by its member states, we're very much focusing on big space missions, verticals, if you want. We had Galileo, Copernicus, now we're going to look at IRIS². And with the EU space law, we're changing a bit the approach. We are regulating the space market in a transversal manner. And that's good news. That's good news because it's a wide recognition that space is a major market, that space is expanding in terms of activities, not just in a few member states, but in all EU 27 member states, and that we need to give a clear and sustainable framework to that segment. So that's excellent news that we come to that point today, that we need to have this EU space law to really frame the market. You said it, we have now an additional member states coming up with a law. So it means that so far we had 11 member states. Today we have 12 member states. And we know that additional member states are preparing national space laws. So we have the choice between a European jungle or a European clear framework. And of course, the Commission will push for a clear European framework because this is, in a way, leveraging as well one of the big power of the European Union, which is its single markets. So more than 450 million citizens, consumers, and that's exactly what we want to leverage through the EU space law in creating this single market for space. But so this is, again, a wide recognition that space has reached a certain level of maturity. This is about mainstreaming space, bringing it closer to the single markets. Of course, where we need to be vigilant, and that's something that we will look at, of course, we need to calibrate properly the regulation. So basically, it's regulation versus competitiveness. We need to ensure that the regulation will foster competitiveness of the space industry, not hamper the competitiveness of the EU space industry. We had recently, a few weeks ago, thanks to the Belgian presidency, a very good debate at the level of ministers, precisely on that point. And there was a wide recognition by almost all ministers that the space law is the way to go, including to support the competitiveness of the EU space industry. So I really want to highlight that competitiveness is really at the heart of what we are doing. On top of course, providing clarity on three chapters: safety rules, resilience rules, and sustainability rules. So again, we will ensure as DG DEFIS that this piece of law will be on the agenda of the next Commission very soon. We'll make the case, we'll try to convince the top leaders, but because it's an evidence-based piece of law, we are quite confident it will be indeed on the agenda.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. I will now move to Isa, and of course, we started with an introduction of the EU space law, but we need to also contextualize the EU space law in a broader context, which is indeed a series of initiatives, a proliferation of dozens of initiatives. So I would like to ask you how to contextualize that and really to see what else beside the EU space law is there to boost the space sustainability, and in particular, what ESA is doing in this sense? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning to everybody. It's a very wide question, a large question. I will try to do it in 5 minutes. Because there are many, many initiatives at international, European, but also at national level for the sustainability of space. And I think this is very good, that these initiatives deal with space governance and sustainability, because there is a need to protect outer space for future generations. And while much is done, we need to do always more. So I will start with the international level, and there I think we should go back to the 60s when the space treaties were prepared and were ratified, because this is always the starting point, to adhere to international law, to public international law, and also to an international liability scheme, is the foundation for a resilient and coordinated and responsible space. But more recently, there are other initiatives at international level. I would like to mention the guidelines on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities, which were adopted by the UN system in 2019. Obviously, these guidelines are non-binding, but the adherence to the UN system, to the yearly reporting mechanism in the scientific and technical subcommittee is already an encouragement for all nations to go towards a sustainable space. And we also know, perhaps Eva already mentioned it, there are current discussions in the UN COPOS, and also in the technical subcommittees to go to the 2.0 guidelines. And these discussions are difficult, maybe also because of the international situation. That for the international level. Now we come to the European level, and obviously, most importantly, we refer to the initiative of the EU space law. At ESA side, what we have is the ESA Zero Debris Charter, which is an initiative which started 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and now we have this charter, which is a community-driven instrument, also non-binding. And the aim of this charter is to go towards zero debris in 2030. And ESA thinks that this community-driven initiative can be very useful because it's flexible, it's open. The principles for the time being are high level, but it's only the starting point to work with the different members of the community, whether from industry, academia, public, university, to work together for a sustainable outer space. Also, I should mention that internally, ESA is applying this zero debris policy already to its own missions, and is very rigorous there. And that we have a program in place, a space safety program, which is dedicated to the planetary protection. Then I come to, last not least, to the national level. Guillaume mentioned it. We have now 12 space laws in Europe, and they are fragmented, so it's certainly useful to have here also a European initiative. And also, we should not forget that space law are not only there to regulate, but they are also national policy instruments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gisela. And my question, my follow-up question is really how we can benefit and take advantage of those initiatives. We have seen one example that is banding, such as the use-based law one, on a voluntary basis, which is the Zero Debris Charters initiated by ESA. But how we really can make sure that those initiatives at the European level are here for boosting instead of compromising in terms of competitiveness worldwide in this space race. And I would like to tackle this question with you, Eva. I hope this is fine.
Thank you. Yes, Eva Bernanke, the CEO of Eutelsat, and I'll start where you signed off, because yes, today the regulatory landscape is too fragmented. We, Eutelsat Group, operate under the French space law, which is one of the countries that has a national space law, but it's clear that this is not only a matter of national law. It needs to be brought up to a more consolidated level, aligning the regulatory landscape across certainly Europe, but also, I believe, to reach out towards other frameworks around the world to achieve a more global alignment around regulation. So harmonization is definitely needed. It's a key thing to bring clarity to operators like us, and Amazon will probably come later, but also to have the adequate level of requirements that we put into both operators as well as industrials for many years to come. Space is a very long cycle investment. It's a very long cycle in terms of how long our assets last. So regulation needs to be stable and forward-looking, and also level the playing field between operators. I think that's a key element in an industry that is fully global. So shouldn't forget that for operators, commercial operators like us, regulation is coming at a certain cost. So I think it's important to have a pragmatic, but also collaborative and open discussion around the cost you impose on the industry, because it will always be a balance between how fast and innovative can we go and how do we balance that up against good regulation. But good regulation implemented in the right way is a great thing for the industry. And I think we need to move forward in the discussion. And it's one of the things that GESOA is also looking for, is to participate actively in the dialogue around how this regulation comes around, what's the content, and how it gets implemented. So we do think that an EU framework that will be applicable not only to EU players, but certainly also to non-EU actors who wants to be active in the EU could foster additional competitive, but also prevent further fragmentation of the regulatory landscape. So we think it's very crucial that policymakers and regulators really foster this dialogue, the cooperation that will enable a pragmatic, but also realistic decision-making process around future regulation. When we think about where the industry as such is right now, it's not only a question of a well-known geostationary industry, where you had a couple of handful of launches of satellites every year towards a well-known spectrum band. Today, with the arrival of both MEO and certainly mostly LEO constellations, with multiple thousands of satellites launched every single year, it's a totally different game. So we need to make sure that the LEO and I think it was referred to a little bit as the Wild West in one of the keynote speakers, also get the right amount of regulation, both keeping in mind all the innovation it brings to the sector, but certainly also the need to preserve this finite resources, both for our industry as a whole, but also for generations to come. We at Eutelsat work a lot with sustainability as one of our core CSR objectives. And we also work with various measures for how to actually get our own sustainability measures. And recently we had a platinum rating on one of these. And it's not for sure that that's the only thing to do, but I think actually having a practice of bringing sustainability and sustainable space in as a core part of your strategy is key to most operators. So with that, I think we need to have a construction where regulation is by design, a thing that actually helps the industry continue to innovate, helps the industry continue to foster, but also give a stable policy environment for a long time and futures to come. So yes, we're fragmented. Yes, we need a stable regulatory environment that is European, but potentially also global. And yes, it needs to be done in close collaboration and dialogue with the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you exactly tackle a point that it's really important, which is the cost of action for the industry, especially in then being compliance with binding instrument as well as with the non-binding instrument. And this is particularly complicated in a situation of extreme proliferation of initiative and fragmentation. So I would like to come to Chiara to ask you, how do you assess this type of proliferation of initiative and fragmentation, especially in terms of charters, code of conduct, rating system, and so on? How we can really, from an industry perspective, assess such an environment?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here. Now, of course, proliferation of initiatives are generally seen as not such a good thing. But from a startup point of view, when you have to put a product on the market, the first thing you do is you sort of think of potential features that are advantageous to your customer. You present them a roadmap. You try and trade off the features that are most interesting them and bring them added value. Now, looking at proliferation of initiatives in this context, you could think that it will enable us to understand which of these initiatives are most interesting, because after all, what we want to have is a legally binding framework, which is technically informed, however, technically agnostic, doesn't have too much impact on competitiveness in the short term, enables future competitiveness. And how do you get all of this right? After all, it's like any startup does. You try something, you potentially fail, or you're successful. And afterwards, you reach to some conclusion which brings everybody together or brings added value at best. Now, we heard it also this morning from Ati that at the moment in the current geopolitical context, it's going to be very hard to get everyone on board, especially at an international and global level. So I think that at a European level, it is extremely important that we try things out, from the Zero Degree Charter to discussing in a very open context the EU space law, to many of the other initiatives that are happening at a national level to see what works and what doesn't. The topic of space sustainability is also a very wide one. We go from debris removal to collision avoidance to in-orbit servicing. And all of these elements have very different economic dimension to them, very different technical challenges. And we can't sort of find immediate solutions that will work immediately. Otherwise, if it were easy, we would have already done it. We wouldn't be discussing about it for so long. So that's fundamentally, I think, what my opinion is from an industrial point of view when it comes to proliferation. There's many actors that have a role to play. Industry has a strong role to play, both on the supply side and on the demand side. I'm actually also very happy to see that companies are extremely active already. Neurospace, we're 3 years old. We have already secured 5 commercial contracts. So we know that space sustainability is something that we actively want to see. Industry itself is calling for regulation. So in this context, again, I think that things are moving forward. One of the things, for example, that I'd like to talk about when we say proliferation is I don't see enough proliferation around initiatives from insurance companies, if I may say so. And I think they have an extremely important role to play. So I'd like to get more proliferation from them in our way towards actually coming to a good situation for space, right? The public sector certainly has fundamentally different roles to play, from enabler to customer. And again, here, I think it's important that we use all of these initiatives to try and understand how the public sector can also support us moving forward. The USST is one of the governing bodies with which we at Neurospace are very active with, both in a love-hate relationship in the sense of, trying to move them forward into things that we believe are important to be done to support the economic development of the sector. And I think this can't be highlighted enough. When we look at Europe, I think we, and again, Ati said it best this morning, we have a huge opportunity of actually leading this space, pun intended. I think that in this respect, there's a huge responsibility of us doing things right. And we need our public sector to move fast. So yes, just to summarize, yes, on proliferation. Again, these initiatives are very, very important for us trying to assess different ways forward. I think that we have to speed up, however, for sure, to come to a conclusion. And I think regulation is certainly necessary in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your reply, and thank you for highlighting the importance of space insurance in terms of fostering sustainability, which is sometimes really underestimated, let's say. Coming back to you, Hardy, and we are really in a crossroad between competitiveness and space safety and sustainability. So I would really like to ask your view on this, let's say, crossroad and this balance from the Amazon perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. It's great to be here in this panel with majority of female representatives, which is great to see, to be honest. So before I answer your question, I just wanted to give a short introduction about Project Kuiper for those in the audience that maybe don't know Kuiper very well. As many of you know, there are billions of people around the world without access to reliable internet, and that's why Amazon launched in 2019 Project Kuiper in order to provide fast, low latency, and affordable internet to customers around the world, including here in the European Union. So Project Kuiper is Amazon's low Earth orbit satellite broadband network, and our network will have both the capability, the capacity, and the performance to serve residential customers, enterprise customers, schools, administrations, mobile network operators, and other customer use cases. We announced 3 different customer terminals that go from our ultra compact, capable of delivering 100 megs per second download speeds, up to our enterprise customer terminal capable of delivering up to 1 gigabit per second download speeds. Now, Amazon has announced that it will be investing more than $10 billion in Project Kuiper, and of course, that's going to create plenty of opportunities to create jobs, as well as to develop infrastructure across the world. And just to give you a few examples of the impact that Kuiper will have in the EU's economy, in 2022, 2 of our key EU partners, Arianespace and Beyond Gravity, announced that the contracts that they were signing with Project Kuiper were the largest orders in their history. So that's just 2 examples of the positive impact that Kuiper is having in the European Union. And just to finalize on this intro, we launched our first 2 satellites back in October, and it was the first time that Amazon put any spacecraft in space. So we were very happy of that milestone. And we, amongst the things that we tested our optical intersatellite links, which will be capable of delivering up to 100 gigabits per second in space across satellites at more than 1,000 kilometers distance. So in terms of how we think about safety and sustainability, let me give you just 4 examples of things that we are doing, because safety and sustainability has really been 2 core tenets of our constellation from day one. First of all, in terms of satellite design, all of our satellites will have active propulsion systems in order to be able to maneuver and be able to avoid any debris or other spacecraft. We will have also a custom-built shielding that will protect critical elements in the satellites. And we will also have backup systems in case any critical function of the satellite is damaged. We can have backup systems that will ensure the functionality of the satellites. So that's on satellite design. In terms of the way that we have designed our constellation, we will be able to actively deorbit our satellites within 1 year of the mission ending. And given the altitudes that we have chosen for our constellation, even in the case of failure of a satellite, they will be able to deorbit naturally in a timely manner. Thirdly, in terms of the operations of the constellation, we will conduct active collision avoidance, and we will, of course, share ephemeris data and other appropriate operational information with other spaceflight operators. And fourthly, and finally, in terms of reflectivity, this is a key consideration for us. We are working very closely with astronomers and others in the industry, and we are trying to build a custom film solution that will mitigate reflectivity, and we will be able to announce more details on that in the future. So let me finish by saying that this is just really a snippet of all the things that Amazon is doing in order to tackle the challenges of safety and space sustainability. And I think they demonstrate the high importance that we place on these topics.
Thank you so much. I will come back to you, Guillaume. And so what we are really trying to do with this EU space law is really position that as a model of regulation, right? And as any other type of regulation, it has to have a solid foundation. So my question will be really at what we are looking at. We mentioned 12 national space law. We are mentioning many initiatives and synergies, of course, with other space actors. So what we are looking at in terms of making sure that we are taking the most of the initiatives that are already there, of the national space law that are already there to be embedded in the EU space law. And one quick follow-up question also in relation to the applicability, not only to the European actors, but also on the broader sense to non-EU policy and non-policy actors.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for your question. Indeed, as you can imagine, when it comes to the preparation of such a new space law, which is, again, very the first piece that will be so overarching when it comes to space activity, we are not acting in a vacuum. The first time we mentioned a new space law was in 2022 in the space traffic management policy communication. We mentioned it again in 2023. So the idea of a new space law is there since quite a while. So of course, in the meantime, we really have taken the time needed to prepare the ground. As part of that preparation, we have scanned all the national laws to see which, countries were regulating what exactly. And of course, the outcome is that you have a very different, a high level of diversity of those national laws. You have certain laws which are very high level, quite lenient, other laws that are very stringent with a high level of sophistication. You have laws covering sometimes just safety. You have laws covering safety, but also cybersecurity more and more. So the scope, the level of sophistication of each national law is very different from another, one to the other. And that's why we think, and thank you, Eva, for being so clear about that since there is a high risk of growing fragmentation, we need to defragment through a regulatory framework. The non-binding approach, this is something we've done for years and years. So now we are at that point where we need to come up with something that is highly predictable, forward-looking, but stable. Stable because, as it was said, space is about long-term investment. It's about getting the critical mass. So you want to have that predictability, you want to have that critical mass, and to do that, you need to have this European framework, binding framework. Again, not in a vacuum. We have scanned all the national laws, so we will import best practices. We know that there are many norms and standards already in the air. So this is like codifying as well good practices within a piece of law. We're looking at what the US is doing as well to see which are the best practices we can import from the US, especially when it comes to cyber security. So we are trying to bring all the different bits and pieces in one single piece of law. When it comes to the applicability of the law, again, what's key is competitiveness. So we don't want to come up with requirements for EU operators only that would have a cost for them, and not to non-EU operators that would sell services within the EU single market. So that's why the scope of the EU law is very clear. It will apply to any entity willing to sell space-based services to the EU 27. It's a single market approach without any exception. So that's what we are pushing for, and therefore we are very, of course, open to discuss with non-EU entities to get their views, their concern, the way they see opportunities as well. But clearly, we need to achieve level playing fields. If not, that law would come at the expenses of our industry, and that's not at all what we have in mind. Rather, the contrary. So this is why we are happy as well to talk with other partners. That's why we will intensify as well the dialogue with third parties, with third countries. Especially when it comes to the US, to ensure that in the long run, we have a kind of shared level of ambition. Because space, in the end of the day, is a common endeavor. And we need the best way to ensure sustainability of space activities is indeed to not just that Europe is leading by example, but in leading by example that we set the standard that others will follow as well in the future. So we need as well in parallel to intensify the dialogue with third countries, starting obviously with the US.
Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, it's not only competitiveness, but it's collaboration, because if the EU space law want to be a pioneer in boundary regulation, this means that they also need to engage with external stakeholder and find something that on a bilateral, unilateral level, it's agreeable worldwide. So I will come back to you, Gisela, to ask you how we actually, European stakeholders, can work together with the global counterpart for developing a better and more sustainable environment.
Thank you for this question. As has been said, sustainability in space is an undertaking of humankind. Like you are always in space, you are very quickly to something global. If we compare, it's the same with the climate change. One country can do many things, but in the end, all countries have to work together. And that is also true for sustainability, and even more true perhaps for sustainability in space. So, and ESA, as from its inception, has been working internationally, worldwide. So we have cooperations with the US, with India, Argentina, Japan, Canada. And now these cooperations also more and more integrate this factor of sustainability to develop jointly technology which go towards this goal. Also, I think we should again here mention the UN fora and the two subcommittees which are in charge of space, the legal, but also the scientific and technical subcommittee, where ESA is very active and also makes presentations and really works towards this sustainability goal. What needs to be mentioned here also is the interagency committee on space debris coordination. And here, what is developed and discussed are international standards, because not only Europe is developing standards, also international. They need to be harmonized. And closer. Sorry? Oh, okay. So in this interagency board, sustainability is more and more a topic. And recently it was mentioned by ISRO, the Indian Space Agency, that the ESA Zero Debris Charter is something which could be inspiring international. And last not least, I think I should mention international cooperation is also with the European Union, because we are both international organizations, and we are working together on sustainability in particular under the accelerator Protect. As you know, you certainly all know the accelerator concept, which was developed by ESA and which we develop now together with the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as you say, it's not only bilateral and unilateral cooperation in terms of inter-agency fora, but it's also international engagement at the UN level. And it was mentioned by Arti this morning that the UN COPOS is taking place right now in Vienna. And of course, this is the fora where we can really try to have the broader view of all the stakeholders involved. From an industry perspective, how do you assess your participation in such a fora? And we have seen before the day before the UN COPOS an example of how we are trying to increasingly engage industry within the context with the conference on the lunar environment and sustainability. So I would really like to hear your view on this.
Thank you. And yes, COPOS is a key forum. It's clear that the discussions that are followed very closely by our team is extremely important to advance harmonization at a global level. However, it also has its limits. I think we as operator has, as part of ITU, been used to having a bit more of a direct connection into it. And I think that's part of creating a truly multi-stakeholder forum, which I think could also be one of the recommendations on how to move this forward. It's also key that we actually draw in the experience and the knowledge that a lot of private operators have in this space. I think when you look across both Europe, but also globally, operators and industrials have a lot of knowledge on what will work, what will take time, what could we do if we thought slightly different about it. And I think that's knowledge that's key to bring into also the UN discussions. So in terms of what I would see could be a good way to move forward is definitely around the Summit of the Future, which is upcoming, in terms of bringing in multi-stakeholder dialogue into how we move things forward. Really make sure that we drive towards a clarity and consistency around relevant policies across not just Europe, but actually the globe. Because as global operators, it will be extremely challenging to operate against very different and non-aligned policies around the world. And then I really invite for the dialogue. This needs to be a pragmatic, but also agile decision-making going forward, where we actually take stock of both what operators and industrials have to say. I think we saw such a multi-stakeholder forum organized by Portugal earlier this year. And I think those kind of forums is one way of actually hearing each other, but also opening up for the dialogue. So yes, we definitely need to move forward, and speed is of essence. Yes, we do need to harmonize, but we need to do this in a multi-stakeholder dialogue in a pragmatic and agile way.
Thank you so much. When we are trying to boost space sustainability, it's of course through initiative of different nature, engaging and making sure that it's an inclusive approach and a multi-stakeholder approach, but it's also by demonstrating. So the idea of boosting by demonstrating, and the Zero Debris Chart is an example with applicability directly at the ESA mission. So I would like to ask Chiara in this sense, how European policymakers and industry can really demonstrate their focus on space sustainability and being leader in space sustainability.
I liked what Eva just said, pragmatic and agile. So getting things done, basically, that's how we can do it. Obviously, at an industry level, in a sense, it's easy or easier, let's say, right? It's a provider of automated operations with SSA and space traffic management intelligence, can talk to operators. It doesn't matter where they are, if they're US, South African, Asian, whatever. And we can have a commercial contract, and things are implemented very quickly. And if you will, it bridges the gap where regulation doesn't reach. So that's, for me, direct leadership, a company believing that sustainability can be a market, trying to bring a product to market, an operator or whoever else identifying that this is, again, also something that brings economic success and establishing business relations. And I think that for me is the one demonstration of leadership in the field. And we have it, as I mentioned, Neurospace already has commercial contracts. So I think this is demonstrated. When it comes to the public sector, these non-binding regulations or rules, which are then implemented directly to own missions. So ESA taking leadership and saying, we're not just telling others how things should be done, we're leading by example is fantastic, right? Because again, it on the one hand just paves the way, but it also allows us to see what works and what doesn't. So that's good. Maintaining dialogue, we heard it multiple times, is extremely important. I think, however, and Eva said it again already, speed is of the essence. I mean, we have been discussing, and I mentioned the USST before, there's so many other things that could still be done. We've discussed in that forum things that can be done to support European awareness, leadership in the field, from sharing historical data to sharing CDMs to providing badges of honor for people doing certain things, are things that we've been discussing for a very long time and haven't been implemented yet, which, again, I think need to be accelerated. The public sector acting as a customer, going back again to ESA missions. I think the EU is a huge market. We spoke about single markets, EU and European organization, public sector entities acting and stepping up and being customers, I think would also be fantastic. So I think that there's huge opportunities. Let's be pragmatic, let's be agile, let's be quick.
Thank you. And from, again, an industry perspective on be agile, be flexible, be inclusive and so on, how we make sure that we really take the most by a synergy between binding and non-binding instrument. What's the balance there?
Thank you, Sarah. Let me start by saying that at Amazon, we share the European Commission's and the European institutions' goal of achieving with the EU space law a robust and innovative space industry that can deliver on the many benefits of space-based services, while at the same time ensuring that this is done in a sustainable manner. What we think is that in order to achieve this, we need rules that meet at least two principles. The first one is that they are built on recognized industry standards, which can be, of course, improved over time as the technology progresses and advances. And so I was very happy to hear Guillaume saying that the EU space law will be evidence-based. I interpret that as meaning that based on recognized standards. And I think the second principle is that we've talked about harmonization at European level, but I think we need to recognize that space-based services are by their nature global. They're not just regionally European. And so we need to make sure that any mandatory rules are consistent with rules that exist internationally, because we need to prevent a fragmentation of rules at international level that would undermine space-based activities. And so in practice, we think that what this means is that any mandatory concrete measures could be appropriate in those limited cases where we have best practices that have matured to a broad agreement amongst industry. And as long as those measures are, on the one hand, flexible and are not too prescriptive in terms of both design or engineering requirements. So let me give you two examples of areas in which Amazon Project Kuiper would be very supportive of mandatory rules from Commission in the EU space law. The first one would be mandating the sharing of tracking data like Kuiper is intending to do. That's something that we would definitely support. The second one would be a requirement that all spacecraft, maybe above a certain altitude, need to have effective maneuver capability in order to be able to avoid debris or other spacecraft. So those are two examples of things that we would very much support, because we think that they meet that criteria of being already matured and broadly agreed areas. Let me give you two examples of things that we wouldn't support or we would caution against. The first one would be any rules that impose an asymmetric compliance regime between, say, small and larger operators. And the reason is that if we want to ensure that space is a safety and sustainable environment, and we have identified rules that are adequate to achieve those objectives, then we think that those rules should be applied to all businesses across the board, not just a subset of businesses, because otherwise you're basically undermining the very goal that you're trying to achieve with these rules. So that's the first one. The second one is we shouldn't be imposing standards and or obligations that lack maturity. For example, I'm thinking about measures like aggregate risk, or that impose restrictive hardware or engineering design. And I'm thinking here about areas like on-orbit servicing and so on. And so overall, I think I would agree with Eva that industry participants are in the best position to encourage exchange and development of the best solutions to achieve a long-term sustainable and safe space environment. And for this reason, we are very supportive of initiatives such as ESA's Zero Debris Charter, which we actually signed a few weeks back in Berlin. And we think that's a very good initiative because it brings together industry and institutional actors that can come together in order to align on ambitious targets and objectives, and that can align those with the evolution of both technology and also scientific research. And so I think I will conclude with this. I would very much invite the Commission to leverage on initiatives like ESA's Zero Debris Charter, and also the community of institutions and businesses that support it, in order to design an EU space law that ensures sustainable space operations, while at the same time fostering innovation and limiting any unnecessary compliance costs for the industry.
Thank you so much. And actually, I would like, if possible, the Commission to have a brief reaction on something that I just mentioned, and especially on what we don't want in the use space law or what Amazon doesn't want. And in particular, at least from my understanding, one of the pillars of the use space law will be really the principle of proportionality in terms of the applicability of the law. And then the second one, if I understood correctly, was really the fact of having standards that do not lack maturity in terms of assessment. So I would like to give the floor to you if you would like to comment.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Jordi, for your statement. I'd like to start with a positive note, saying that's what you can support, and that's positive because indeed that's, those are ideas or measures that we want to push through the use space law when it comes to sharing of certain data, plus the effective maneuvering capacity. I mean, that's something, a must, basically, today. A point of nuance when it comes to your two additional points. One is proportionality. Of course, we need to ensure that there is certain common set of rules for all, large players, big players. At the same time, we also need to ensure that, as I said before, that we calibrate correctly the level of regulation, especially when it comes to certain players, not to kill the innovation. Today, and in my unit, I'm in charge of creating that environment in Europe to enable the rapid scaling up of new space companies. So of course, I mean, I don't want through the law to kill that boost. So that's why we really need to calibrate carefully that level of regulation that will be applied to new commercial entrants. And that's why we will apply proportionality. So it's not a one-size-fits-all law that will apply the same way to all entities. We have to, again, calibrate the level of regulation that will apply to certain entities, while ensuring at the same time that we enhance globally the level of protection, the level of sustainability of all our space entities. So still proportionality is something that we will very much enshrine within the space law to ensure that we are not hampering innovation, we are not hampering competitiveness. Your second point when it comes to ensuring that we are not pushing too far when or those domains where the lack of maturity of the industry remains quite low, like you mentioned on-orbit servicing. Again, here, we need indeed to strike the balance between pushing for the establishment and development of new markets, at the same time ensuring that indeed we are not pushing our industry towards technology that we don't master in Europe. So this is that pragmatism as well, that dose of realism that we need to push, using the law to generate new markets, at the same time ensuring that indeed we are not pushing too far, too quickly certain technologies. Two points I'd like to mention. One is speed. It was mentioned by you. We need to act very quickly. We see what's happening, not just in Europe or in the US, China as well. So we really need to act very swiftly. That's my first point. And then the second point is transparency and the call for collaboration. That's something that we have done so far, collaborating very closely with industry member states. And when I say industry, it's large industry, small industry associations. We've embarked associations very close in the reflection and development of the space law, together with the European Space Agency as well. So this is, this collaboration and that collaborative attitude is something we have applied and will continue doing that in the upcoming months.
Thank you. Like to briefly react, or otherwise?
I actually had a point, but seeing that if we can open it up now, Sarah, yeah. So I've been listening to the data aspect, and one of the things that I always ask myself is we are pushing at a European level transparency and sharing of data. Now, in a recent conversation with a potential customer that I can't disclose, the lead of this company mentioned specifically that they would not want to share their exact positions because they are servicing specific customers that they wish to protect. Now, one of the things that I wonder is why do we potentially insist on a full transparency of data, whereas we know that there's a possibility of learning through federated means, so sharing business insight without necessarily sharing data. And for me, this is an important point because it could be a killer of something that we really need because we wish too much or we go too much in the details and where, let's say, laws or regulation end up imposing too much. So that's just something that I really need to say. Thanks.
Can I react to Guillaume's point? So on the point of asymmetry, I understand that there's definitely a need to have proportionate rules, but I think there are risks with imposing different rules to different players, and we've seen this in many areas of EU law. It's not just about space law. There are many digital rules out there that have this embedded asymmetry of application of the rules, and I think there's a risk because I'll make the comparison with road safety. Imagine if you decided that there are certain technical specificities that cars need to have in order to ensure road safety. And then after you have reached that conclusion, you said that somehow small businesses, small manufacturers of cars will not have to comply with those requirements. I don't think that delivers a safe road. So that was the idea that I was having in mind in terms of the asymmetry. Sorry, I think you want to open.
Thank you so much. And I think it's a long and ongoing discussion, but I would really like now to open the floor to the Q&A for giving the possibility to everyone to ask questions. So, yes. It's coming.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Giancarlo Filipazzo from the European Space Agency, Copernicus Space Office. I'd like to ask a question which is a bit off track from what has been discussed so far, even though there was mentioning of the Green Deal, of the ESA Green Agenda, sustainability, and innovation. So within this framework, where does eco-design stand? And is there a way through which we can incentivize the use of eco-design by startups, established players, maybe even through the space law, for example, offering opportunities through carbon credits? I'd just like to know if anybody in the board has some ideas on this. Thanks.
Who would like to take the question? We can maybe collect 2-3 questions and then we reply to all. Any other question? If any? You can reply in the meantime.
Thank you so much for your question, a very valid one. As indicated, the EU space law will have 3 pillars, so safety, resilience, and sustainability. Sustainability, what we have in mind is to have the same way of calculating the impact of space activities on the environment. Because today we have different ways and means of calculating what the impact of space activities on the environment. And we need to have this common foundation. And that's what we'll be creating through the EU space law first, to ensure that companies generate certain set of data that is standardized, if you want, that we collect that set of data and we have a clear idea about what's the impact of space on environment. And then the second next step, natural step, will be to take measures to decrease the impact that environmental footprint, if you want. But that will come naturally as a second step. We really need to first set the foundation, have the same way of calculating, and then we can design new measures to decrease this impact of the space activities on the environment. So Ecolabel is something that we are looking at, indeed. But for us, the first step is really this common way of calculating things, which does not exist today.
But just to add to it, for us as operators who are in part of together with the industry, of course, in a larger design phase, this will probably feed into some of the ESG targets we have around, especially when we come to scope 3, which is an area where we're right now collaborating across the industry to get, as you said, common measures. How do we actually measure some of the sustainability targets and science-based targets? We'll take around both scope 1 and 2, but for operators, mainly scope 3. So I think in the aspect that we get that measured in as one of the levers for actually addressing scope 3 targets, I think this will be extremely useful for the industry.
Could I just add something, make some publicity for some of the Commission actions, actually? So I don't know if you're aware, but the Commission's been very active through the EIC proposals and actually getting new technologies up for sort of in space, also sustainability. So some of the Pathfinder, some of the challenges that have been issued recently have very much looked into eco-design, or let's say more clean solutions to some of the technologies. So even though certain things aren't necessarily transforming into regulation immediately, there are sort of initiatives to support that technology development, which is really quite important as well.
Thank you so much. I'm asking whether I can ask one more question. Perfect. Here we are.
Thank you. Kumar Singaraja, Eurova. I don't have an axe to grind on LEO systems because I'm not working on LEO systems. So let me ask probably a hard question. It's good that the Commission is pushing forward at speed. It's actually a bit of a pity it didn't happen already, the EU space law. But the question really is the question of proportionality, noting what one of the speakers has said. It's a fairly obvious, straightforward mathematical calculation to show that if you've got a large number of LEO satellites with a certain failure rate, that contributes much more to risk of catastrophic collision than if you got a smaller number of satellites with a given failure rate. So I don't think there's any merit in an argument that there shouldn't be an aggregate risk limit, but would be very helpful if the panelists could opine on whether that should be an essential feature of the EU space law going forward.
Who would like to take the question? Eva, please.
Maybe I can start and then I can hand over to Guillaume because it's certainly a topic we've been debating also in GSOA because it's a bit among satellite operators. You might expect that, and it shouldn't be expected that we are fully aligned around it because we come from very different aspects. It's clear that satellite operators with fewer satellites and a different approach to risk, because I think there is a different way of both building your constellations, but also different approaches to how much you risk when you launch, when you operate, and the pure mass of things. So I think it's clear that operators have the dialogue. We open up for different levers for it, but it's not certain that operators will be able to solve this without the intervention from regulators, and also the dialogue among regulators around the world, because it's clear that fragmentation is not good for how we operate truly global constellations.
Please.
Thanks so much. And indeed, I mean, we're fully aware that the appetite or the approach to the risk may be slightly different from certain operators. But, and again, this brings us back to the point about what should be the minimum level of requirement that will ensure in the law, and that's something that that we will push anyhow. There will be no complete exemption, if you want. I mean, the idea is really, except for purely military assets, but the idea is to have common minimum rules that will apply to all. And then, and I will not go into the details of the proportionality rules here, but for each different pillar, safety, resilience, and sustainability, will design what's the proportional way of applying the law, depending on the type of the size of the company, the level of maturity of the company, the orbits we are talking about. I mean, for instance, going beyond geo orbit for us does not really matter. So that's not something that we'll regulate. So, you know, I mean, there will be different criteria depending on which pillar we're talking about when it comes to the proportionality issue. And that's a result as well of discussing with industry, trying to really come to that precise point where you need to regulate, but not too much, not to kill as well the innovation and the small players. So that's really the outcome of that long discussion we had with industry, this calibration of the proportionality rules.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question, please.
Thank you so much for this. Olivier Lemaitre, Eurospace. So you know that industry is in principle supportive of the future EU space law. We are curious to see what's in it. But in any case, when the EU will regulate, the industry will abide. On the one hand, obviously. On the other hand, ESA, which is not a regulatory body, also has its charter for zero debris. Thank you. And even if ESA does not regulate, at least ESA is our main customer. So we tend to abide also to what our main customer is saying. So what are the steps that are being taken by both institutions to ensure that they go hand in hand, that it will work together? Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So as you know, we're talking almost every day first with ESA. So dialogue is always good, even if sometimes you disagree, at least we talk. And then, I mean, first, so when it comes to the Zero Debris Charter, so that's something we've followed very carefully. Of course, you will understand that we cannot be a signatory to the charter at that point of time. That would kind of preempt basically the content of the EU space. So that's something we can't commit to. But we've been in close touch with the ESA colleagues when they were preparing this that high-level document, non-binding high-level document, to ensure that the level of ambition, if you want, was matching when it comes to what was in the Zero Debris Charter and what we have in mind for the EU space law. Number one. Number two, we don't want to confuse industry, and we should not confuse industry. So we're having this discussion with ESA as well to ensure when it comes to the next steps of the Zero Debris Charter, we need to ensure that the EU space law will be in the landscape very soon. So not telling industry you need to go in that direction, whereby then a few weeks later or months later, the EU space law will set the destination, where to go actually, through binding rules. So that's really something, our common responsibility to ensure that we are not going to confuse industry, that we are going to fully align. That's something that we are committed to. Then when it comes to the law, we had a discussion with ESA to benefit from ESA expertise, to benefit from ESA views as well when it comes to the preparation of the law. And that is part as well of ensuring that there will be alignment in the way we will develop, negotiate, and implement the EU space law.
Of course, of course.
Thank you. I think it's a very important question, and I think the two public entities which are in charge of space in Europe, they need to go hand in hand. And obviously, the EU has regulatory power. ESA has not, but as you have said, we have put in place some non-binding instruments. I think we can say at ESA's side we are ready to work together with the EU. One area where I see where ESA could contribute is the area of standardization, where ESA has obviously a long-standing experience.
Thank you so much. And I think many of the points addressed now will have a need for a long discussion, but we will need now to close the panel. So I would like to thank all the speakers to contribute to this session. It's been really interesting, and I will invite everyone to give a big round of applause for the speaker.